Okay, thanks very much. It's very nice to be here. I think it was just on 4 years ago that I was attending very similar sessions, getting ready for the Act to come into Australia and grab any piece of, as Graham pointed out, food for thought or insights into how we could achieve it within our work sites without turning ourselves inside out. 3 areas that I'm going to talk about are, as you can see, governance, contractor management and shared responsibilities. These have been the primary areas where we've seen a major shift in what we needed to do differently. But before we get into these in more detail, I'd like to give you a little bit of information about Optus so you've got a bit of context as to what I'm talking about. Optus is the second largest telecommunications provider in Australia. I won't mention who the largest is, you probably know. We commenced operation back in '92 and we've got a fixed, a mobile and a satellite network. So our vision is to be the most loved and recommended service brand in Australia. So that's what we're aiming for. Now that's the cornerstone of achieving that vision is a very strong network. So the Optus network, just to give you, for those of you who love a few stats to be thrown around, we've got 9.4 million mobile subscribers. We operate 6,000 mobile sites. We've got some 10,000 kilometres of fibre cable connecting our cities across Australia and 26,000 kilometres of aerial coaxial cable in our suburbs. We run 4 satellites, 2 of which, interestingly, have free-to-air and subscription services that go out to 2 million locations in both Australia and New Zealand. But honestly, I'm not here to sell you anything. Now, to look at Optus prior to 2011, so the Act came into play as of January 2012. It became active in Australia, but the Act itself is a 2011 Act. So prior to that, Optus had a very robust and strongly performing health and management system. It was well performing in terms of our 10,000 staff and their activities. The company was the first private organisation to be granted a self-insurance licence under the Commonwealth scheme from a workers' comp perspective, which was in 2008. That also gave us the opportunity to operate within a safety jurisdiction of at the Commonwealth level, which is very similar to the current New Zealand law. So there's quite a complementary approach there. Once harmonisation and the Act was enabled within Australia, the Commonwealth stepped across to the harmonised laws, as did the state laws for health and safety, excepting for WA and Victoria. Not a lot of harmony there, thus your Melbourne experience is all I can say. So Optus has the Australian Standard and New Zealand Standard 4801 certification. We also have certifications with the Australian Government to allow us to undertake construction projects. So we're extremely well certified by external agencies, and very much so, there was a lot of comfort within the organisation that we've done safety well for a lot of years, we're going to be fine. Once these new laws come into place, we're going to be really well placed to cope with this new tide that the health and safety wave will bring, particularly what the health and safety people are saying. It's not going to be such an impact come January 2012. This perception would soon be reversed, and this was really the key part. It's been certainly outlined by Paul in his presentation. We'd soon reverse that perspective. The expanded duty of care has been a key driver for this. Outsourcing is a core part of how Optus operates, and as Catherine pointed out, just in the areas that I look after, it's 2 to 1. So 1 staff member to every 2 contractors. They're now all workers. So we've gone to 12,000 workers that our health and safety management system, just in the area that I look after, needed to accommodate. So particularly, to give you a tangible example, the build and maintenance aspect of our network, those activities are outsourced. We don't do that build, we don't do that maintenance ourselves. Where previously the focus was on quality of work and don't disrupt the service was pretty much the main message, if you like, to our contractors. Come the new laws, Optus needed to reassess how we looked at worker safety and understanding of those risks that we were asking our contractors to manage. And previously, we placed those risks with the contractors. And I don't think I need to do a straw poll here to say who is involved with contractors in this room. I know the answer. So there needed to be a recognition that Optus was a construction company, and that wasn't something that came easy, and Catherine will certainly attest to you as to how difficult that was, and she was very pivotal in convincing the senior managers in the offices that Optus actually was a construction company. We were the principal contractor. It was probably a little known fact. Hope that's not being taped, in a lot of our contracts that we were a principal contractor and we held a lot of those risks already, but we needed to realise those so much more once the new Act came in. In fact, just in the last financial year, Optus engaged some 120 high-risk construction contractors to proactively fulfil our obligations to not only our staff but also our contractors would take a huge shift in mindset. The three areas that I'll focus the remainder of the presentation on are these in terms of we needed to shift from one of reliance on our compliance and our certifications to one of ownership of our risks. We needed to look very closely at our outsourced risks to those shared obligations and to also our PCBUs and how we communicated and cooperated with them. Rather than dictating, we needed to really be involved with those PCBUs and communicating with them. Now, I'll start first with governance. Prior to 2012, the reporting and monitoring functions for safety were very much at mid-level of the organisation. So it was a very operational focused, and you can probably in your own minds draw a parallel to how that is currently in your organisation. As Paul pointed out, it really needs to be taken to the top. It needs to come from the top. From Optus's perspective, we needed to form a committee or what we call an Executive Safety Leadership Council, which has the officers on it. It's part of how they meet their due diligence requirements, is sitting on that council each quarter. We've also had to extend it offshore to our parent company, and for some of you that may be a reality as well. You need to look to who owns your company and do they know what their obligations are. As I said, the terms of reference for that Executive Safety Leadership Council encompass the elements of compliance with due diligence. Fundamental to the officer's due diligence was a shift from being reactive to being proactive, and again Paul has pointed that out, that really that needs to be a huge shift in the way you're looking at safety come the new Act. In terms of due diligence, our structures for governance have now been established that they can provide an oversight into areas such as understanding what the risks are. We're able to better monitor our incidents and how we're following up in terms of corrective actions, and certainly a key one was the effectiveness of how our resources were being deployed and our processes were being implemented. Now, to achieve this, the organisation, however, needed to replace its incident reporting system. It was very early on identified by the officers that what we had in place was not going to be good enough. What we've done with that incident reporting system is expand it out to capture risks as well as events, so incidents that are reported. We've even this year started to roll that out to our contractors. So we've invited our 120 high-risk contractors to report incidents through this one system. One of the key powerful parts of that and fundamental to our choosing that system was that we wanted it to be on the smartphones, on the tablets of our people leaders, not just on the desktop, and they needed to get back to the desktop to fill out the reports, to action what was given to them in terms of investigations and corrective actions. We wanted it to be in their pocket so they could, when they're on the field, when they're out on the go, undertake corrective actions and note that down, get it done quickly and efficiently. It also allowed us to capture sorry, I thought that was a different slide, to take us to be able to capture for our executive what sort of incidents we were having, where they were coming from, so it had a very powerful and versatile reporting format. So that's been one of the major investments that as an organisation we've had to undertake in terms of the new laws. The next area that I'll talk about is getting into the nitty-gritty of our contractor management. And it wasn't just the Act internally from Optus's perspective that led us to tackle a major rework of how we looked at contractor safety and the management of those systems. It was also our customers' expectations, and I've heard that a number of times this afternoon and also in the meeting that we had earlier in terms of the Charter Committee, that our customers' expectations were very much looking to how we were handling safety. Were we, as a trusted service provider, also a safe provider? Were we able to fulfil that? Because in reality, we were a PCBU along with our customer, so they had a very vested interest in us doing it well. Our customers, particularly from the banking, from the government industries and from the mining companies, were very interested in what we are doing in terms of safety. We've tackled it from this 4-quadrant approach, and I've talked a little bit already about the in-control system and how we've undertaken incident management. We've also looked to provide information to our... And sorry, this was the slide I thought I had earlier. This is the sorts of reports we can then provide up to our executive, giving them a breakdown of what's happening with our contractors, as well as obviously what's happening with our staff. We've also launched a portal for health and safety management that all of you, if you so choose to do, can go have a look at that portal. It's on the website. It's available to anyone to look at. If you're wanting to, you can get into that and look at our online training. You can complete the training. They'll be wondering why are all these New Zealand contractors getting into our online induction, but it's there and available for anyone to undertake. We recognised early on that to truly be achieving communication, cooperation and consultation with our PCBUs, we needed to start from the base of sharing. And this type of portal has been pivotal to making our information accessible for our contractors and also all in the one place rather than having to fish back through contracts to find where that information might be. We've also launched a suite of contractor standards, and these we found our interpretation of the Health and Safety Act in Australia was that we needed to assist our contractors to meet their obligations in terms of Optus contracted works. So we issue these standards when we kick off a contract. We also reissue them with statements of work. So if there's a master service agreement that's been set up and there's statements of work that come out under that, these standards would be issued at that time to say these are the risks we've identified and what our expectations are as to how you'll handle those. The other areas that we've moved into is in relation to procurement, and this was surprisingly an area we needed to get into and probably needed to get into quite a bit earlier. We needed to line up what was happening with our contractor and legal system, our legal documentation. We found there was a no-win situation if we were trying to engage a contractor to increase leadership walks, to undertake a certain style of performance reporting once a contract had kicked off. So once a project was underway, there was no traction to be gained, no matter what the laws were saying, to then be getting them to change how they were approaching performance reporting. If it wasn't in the contract, oftentimes it wasn't going to happen. So we needed to get back to that stage where we were identifying our contractors and engaging them to identify within our contracts and our bids what the risks were that we were going to need to be managing as a PCBU, but also, as importantly, what our customers' expectations, particularly if you're working with government organisations, very quick to adopt the new laws and sort their procurement out to warrant that from their contractors, which we were in that position. The next area we're looking at is in terms of governance. And from a governance perspective, the key area here that I wanted to mention was in terms of pre-qualification. And this is why it was so important to get back to our procurement people and establish what was going to be in our contracts. Pre-qualification is now mandatory for Optus contractors. That's not something we could do overnight. We're some 3 years into the new Act and we're only really achieving full pre-qualification of those 120 high-risk contractors now. It's taken a fair while to achieve, but we've seen it as a real cornerstone of how we manage that. When we have a panel of preferred providers, they're pre-qualified in terms of their health and safety capabilities and that they're up to the job that we're going to be engaging them for. And that pre-qualification is also through the portal. We've undertaken a system that is web-based. It allows our contractors to provide a level of portability of that pre-qualification. So there's many pre-qualification companies and products, if you like, out there on the market, and no doubt they'll be coming to your inbox very soon and trying to get you to sign on to them. But we wanted to choose a system that was used by a lot of other big corporates in Australia so that it was a portable commodity, if you like, for our contractors. We also needed to be versatile and flexible in how we expected mandatory pre-qualification to be achieved, because this was a cost to the contractors. This wasn't something we were paying for. We expected them to pay for it to be able to have the pleasure of working with Optus. So we needed to be flexible in how we approach that. They could have their own external accreditation, such as 4801. They could have another pre-qualification. As I said, there's many out there on the market that no doubt will come up in your jurisdiction from Australia, from overseas. We would accept those as well if they showed us that the organisation had the core competencies that we required. The final area has been training, which has already been mentioned that was quite an important piece. What we've done, we've always had online induction for our contractors. We've expanded that to include supervisors. So we recognise that contract supervisors within our contracting organisations were pivotal in terms of incident reporting and upholding the standards that we required. So we've provided some online training for them as well. You can get that through the portal if you're wanting to access that course. Now, I know that all sounds great. A number of you will not be from a big corporate. You will not be interested in how we've gone about doing contractor management, probably with a lot of money, a lot of people and a lot of systems. So I did take the opportunity to speak to some of our contractors who are small to medium businesses. In fact, a lot of them are sole traders, before I came to speak to you today, just to get a bit of an insight in what has been the impact of the new laws in Australia on their businesses. And once I got past some of the colourful language down the phone, the guys I was talking to are technicians and installers who work in our exchanges, work on commercial rooftops, and also do installations into domestic premises across Australia. So as I said, they're 2 to 3 steps removed from Optus in the contracting chain, and they obviously knew they were talking to someone safe and they weren't going to lose their job just because they told me how it was. Some of them are sole traders, but a lot of them are in sort of 4 to 6 type of employees in the company. So what were their thoughts? They can be summarised in a couple of areas. One was that they found that their documents, their safety documents, which they always had, were now checked quite routinely and much more closely. They got feedback on what was in their safety documents. Quite a surprise for a number of them in the early part of the new Act. Customers were also being quite demanding. They were specifying how they wanted the work done, how they wanted some of this installation work done. Different customers were wanting things done differently, and I'll give an example in relation to asbestos. So some government programs that these installers were working on, no disruption of asbestos. If you find ACM, don't touch it, find another way to install. If you can't install without disrupting it, off-site, don't do it. That was one government agency's approach to asbestos. Another government agency commissioning the same sort of PCBUs, when they were rolling out their program, said, no, it's okay to disrupt asbestos. We know that you can do it safely, but we're going to want to train you. We're going to want to actually deliver the training to you personally, and that's how you'll work with asbestos. So quite a different experience for these installers. Some of the jobs were taking, as you can imagine, quite a bit longer because of the extra safety steps being required. And there were certainly more checks and balances. One of my installers that I spoke to, he'd been in his own business for 15 years. And his comment back to me was that he'd never had so much company on the job site. He worked alone, and he had 2 or 3 site visits in the first year and the same again in the second year, and he was waiting to see what was coming in the third year. So they certainly were getting a lot of site inspections from the PCBU chain, and I suppose the further away from the customer they were, the more visits they were getting, because all those PCBUs were going, okay, well, I've got to get out to site, I've got to see what's happening. Not every site, please don't start getting edgy in your seat. The sorts of figures we were looking at to get out to site on, particularly on large jobs, was 10% of the site. So if we were installing on 50,000 sites, we were trying to get to 10% of those. I won't do the maths because I'm under pressure, I'm under lights. But to give you a second example, I thought I'd take an example where a PCBU, and take a leaf from Paul's presentation, where they were minimising the risk. And this was the risk of an isolated and dispersed workforce. And so I'm going to talk about what their experience as a PCBU was. So this is an organisation who do work direct for Optus. They have 1,500 people in their workforce, so it's also technicians and installers. None of them are employed by this PCBU. All of that workforce are subbies. They're all their own PCBU. It's a bit difficult to get your head around. But they had a real concern about the supervision that they could, or in actual fact could not, supply on these workers' work site. So 1,500 workers across Australia. As you know, it's a pretty big space where they were typically installing, remote and rural. Even worse, some of the driveways were 14 kilometres long. These guys were going to houses that were a long way from nowhere. Their concern was that they weren't able to provide any level of supervision, let alone even know if that guy got there and got home safely. So what they did was, why I asked that question about the smartphone and the tablet, they required every one of those 1,500 workers to have a smartphone or a tablet as a tool of trade. They said, you're all going to have one. If you don't have one, I'm sorry, after the first year, you're not going to be able to get jobs from us. We're going to need you to upgrade to that level of technology. Because what they were wanting to do was use technology to help them to meet their obligations in terms of supervision. When an installer arrived at site, they had to complete their site survey on the mobile app, on that smartphone. That was then uploaded in real time. Now, obviously, there wasn't mobile coverage in a lot of parts of Australia, so that would be the next time they hit coverage, that would upload. But it was date stamped as to when they actually did do it, when they arrived at the job. When they did that site survey, if they were going to work on the roof, they weren't able to continue with that install in terms of the technical things they had to input into their job app until they'd taken a photo of the anchor point and safety line. And that was quality checked at the end when they were paid. So if they if they were tying off to a tree, to their bumper of the car, actually we let that one go, but if they were tying off to a fence pole, that was, there was feedback round to that installer. And that feedback probably had some colourful language about what the heck were you doing, but also there was some coaching. Okay, that's perhaps not the way we want you to do your anchor point and your safety line. The same was done with entering into ceiling spaces. These guys would have to take a photo of the power isolation so that when they're going up into a ceiling space, there was a comfort for that PCBU that yes, they were isolating the power and weren't going to be electrocuted when they got up there. So it was a really powerful lockstep approach to safety that gave them a comfort. And can I tell you, as the contractor, as Optus contracting to this PCBU, gave us a lot of credibility with our customer who was wanting those installations done, that this was the type of PCBU we were able to put forward as one of our contractors. Now, I know my time is probably getting close, so I'll wrap up. We have constantly over the past 3 years been doing this cycle of what do we need to stop doing, what do we need to start doing, what do we need to continue? Because unfortunately this new Act, it's a bit like an onion. You take off one peel, you start to recognise there's more things you need to think about and more parts of your business you need to look at. The types of things we've been stopping doing, as I said at the start, relying on our performance and track record and focusing on our certifications. That was not going to get us far. We need to start looking, and this is where we're looking at the moment, is back upstream at those obligations in terms of safety and design. And we need to really powerfully be looking at monitoring and evaluating the contractors we do have through our pre-qualification panels. And finally, what we need to continue doing is cooperating and sharing with our PCBUs and simplifying our internal systems. With these new laws, we didn't need to make it more complex, and Optus was a classic for having 90-page health and safety procedures. We didn't need to share those. We need to share something much snappier and in that 2 or 3 page format that really captured what was needed by the PCBUs in that process. Thank you for your time.